Good morning, Ida here. This is going to be a video about how to deal with depression. It is a video that I was planning on doing. I have been planning on doing it. It's going to be based on a blog post that I wrote years ago. But I haven't got around to do the video before, and then I saw, I think it was the day before yesterday, Little Sen Crone posted a video about her experiences with depression and what worked for her, and I thought then now would be a really good time to do this video. Hang on. Yeah, because I think it's a subject that is very important to talk about. I think it's very important that those of us that have experience with depression, that we share what we learned to help others, but also that we talk about it so that people know that they're not alone in this. Depression is extremely common, but still it's something that a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about, and that makes it much more difficult, because then you don't get the support that might benefit you. And I myself have problems with recurring depressions since I was a teenager, which is a really long time by now. And if you watch this and know me from real life, you might not know that, because it's something that I don't normally talk about very much either, for various reasons. But I decided that it is important to talk about it. It is important to let people know how common it really is, and it's important, as I said, to share our experiences with what you can do if you're depressed to feel better. Because a lot of people tend to think of depression as something that is like a minor problem. You know, you feel a bit sad and you can just pull yourself together and you'll be fine. But that's not really true. We were talking about clinical depression. Is a really serious condition, can be really serious, and very what's it called, like, it can be a real disability. It can have real long-term consequences for your life and for your health, and perhaps most importantly, depression is a condition that kills. People die from depression because most people that commit suicide, or that try to commit suicide, they are struggling with depression. Depression is a major, if not the biggest, cause of suicide. And so then we need to take depression seriously, and we all need to do what we can to help people that are suffering from depression to deal with it. So that's why I'm making this video, because I feel that it is important to talk about, and I have many years of experience, and so I feel that I have learned a few things that might actually help others. Now, I want to point out that I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a professional in that sense. I'm talking about what I've learned through my own experience, things that I have researched on my own, trying to find a way to cope, but also that I have picked up from when I've been in treatment. The treatment I've been getting is cognitive behavioral therapy, I think it's called in English. That's the treatment that I have experience with, and medication, of course, which, to be honest, haven't really worked very well for me. So this is based much on also my own research and me trying things that I've found information about in other places. But I also want to point out that I have some professional knowledge. I am a trained health coach, so I did learn something about depression while I trained for that. Also, I am a nurse, and of course in those studies we also have a psychiatry, what's it called, psychiatry class, course, but it's very basic, so I don't have real professional knowledge about any mental illness, including depression. I just want to point that out, that I'm not a professional in that sense. I can't guarantee that what I'm talking here will work for you. It's worked for me, and I think it can work for others, but it doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And I also want to point out that if you decide to try this and it doesn't work, that doesn't mean that nothing will work. You're just gonna have to keep looking for something, because there are a lot of different things you can do out there, and sooner or later you're going to find something that will work. So just hang in there and get professional help if you need it. You know, watching YouTube videos, it's all very fine. You can get a lot of knowledge and a lot of good advice on YouTube, but sometimes you do need a professional. So that said, in my experience, I have notes, by the way. This is going to be a long video because I have a lot to say. So I have notes so I don't forget anything. But in my experience, there's basically 3 things you need to know to cope with depression. And much of the time, again, in my experience, these 3 things are really all you need to cope with depression. Sometimes you will need other help, as I said. Sometimes you will need medication. But in a lot of cases, it seems to me like these 3 things will actually be all you need. So they might be a good starting point, at least. And they are: 1, you have to remember that your brain is your own worst enemy when you're depressed. Your brain is an asshole. 2nd, don't do the things you feel like doing. Do the things the person you would like to be would have done. And the 3rd thing is that failing is an inevitable part of life. And failing several times, a lot of times, almost all the time, is an inevitable part of life. And failing is not a reason to give up. You will fail, and it's not a reason to give up. That's the 3rd point. So I'm going to get into these a bit more, into detail, so they make more sense. And I'm not used to having all these notes and things. I don't know where to keep them so I can see them and still kind of look in the camera. The reason your brain is your own worst enemy when you're depressed is that you get depressed because of how your brain works. There are a lot of different things that can cause depression, but basically the symptoms of depression are negative thoughts and negative feelings, and those are created by your brain. Those are always created by your brain, no matter what was the reason that you got depressed in the first place. The negative thoughts and the negative feelings that are the main symptoms of depression are created by your brain. They in turn can give rise to other symptoms such as fatigue or anxiety. But the thoughts and feelings are your brain. And that you can say that depression is basically when your brain are giving rise to thoughts and feelings that are not adequate for the situation. So when you can get control over those symptoms, your negative thoughts and negative feelings, being depressed won't be a problem to you anymore. It will be much, much less disabling. So you need to learn to pay attention to and be aware of what you're thinking and what you're feeling. You need to learn to reflect on that. And that is something that takes a lot of practice. You need to notice when your thoughts are starting to become negative, and when you start to feel sad or hopeless or whatever it is you're feeling. And you need to be aware that that is something that your asshole of a brain is doing to you. That is your brain being mean to you, and you don't have to accept that. And so you're going to need strategies to fight this enemy that you have. And different strategies are going to work for different people and in different situations. So it's good to have like a number of different strategies that you can try and use when you get into these situations, when you notice that your thoughts are becoming negative and you're starting to feel low. The first thing you can do is you can start to try to outsmart your brain, like, and question the reality of the things that the brain is telling you, because it's lying to you. That's what the brain is doing. It's telling you shit that isn't true. So ask yourself, what was it that made me feel like this right now? Which thoughts did I have that gave rise to these feelings? And are these thoughts really true? Is there any evidence that these thoughts are the actual truth? Are there any alternative explanations? Is there any evidence that those alternative explanations are in fact the truth instead? Is there another way to look at this? For example, is it really true that I am completely useless? No, it's not, because I'm actually quite good at knitting. Is it true that no one in the whole world likes me? No, it's not, because this friend or this family member or just this colleague at work is nice to me. They actually seem to like me. Did that person really say that to me because they think I'm an idiot? Or could there be another reason why that person said this sort of mean thing to me? Could it, for example, be that it's right before lunch and this person is just hangry? Like, question your thoughts. That's the first thing you could do. The second thing is to give your brain a taste of its own medicine. When you notice you're having a negative thought, hold on to that thought and repeat it over and over again. Don't think of anything else. Don't do anything else. Just stick to that thought, no matter what. Because you will notice pretty soon, most of the time, that when you do that, the negative feelings that tends to come along with negative thoughts will go away. If you stick to that thought, you will stop feeling bad about it. Now, if you have like really severe anxiety, if you're having problem with PTSD, there are some thoughts that you might not want to stick to. But if we're talking about this sort of garden variety negative thoughts that you have when you're being depressed, then try to stick with it, and the bad feeling will go away. And the brain will also beg you to let it do something else instead, because it will be bored. Thinking the same sad, stupid thing over and over again is boring. The brain will want to pay attention and do something else instead. And then stick with it for as long as you can until the bad feeling is gone, and then you can try to replace the thought with something positive instead. And that's not necessarily easy, especially if you're depressed. It can be really hard to like just find something positive to think about. So if it helps you, find some good affirmations and write them down and keep them at hand, or memorize at least one, so you have it. You always have access to it, and you can have that one as a positive thought to replace the negative thoughts. Another thing, and this sounds silly, but it works remarkably effective, at least for me, is to just keep your brain to shut up. When it's thinking negative thoughts, just like tell it to shut the fuck up. You don't need that shit. And if it makes it easier for you, you can do that and visualize the thought disappearing somehow. You can imagine yourself catching the thought and throwing it away, or you can imagine it exploding or just dissolving into thin air or whatever, if that makes you feel better, or just sort of like wave it away, but just explicitly give your brain the message that you do not want that thought. You're not interested in that bullcrap. The wasp. Where was I? Also, a busy brain gets less opportunity to cause you problem. So keep your brain busy. Because if you're making it focus on something, it won't think up of things of its own to make you feel bad. So keep it busy and do things. And that is where step number 2 comes in. Well, point number 2 that you need to know. And that was that you shouldn't do what you feel like doing, but you should do what the person you want to be would have done. And this is because the major trap with depression is that it makes you do things that aren't necessarily good for you. It tends to also make you stop doing the things that are good for you. So you tend to get stuck in this vicious circle when you do less and less of the things that make you feel good and more of things that aren't actually good for you. And because we tend to adapt, we tend to adapt our behavior after how we're feeling, which means that when we're depressed, we're feeling sad and we're feeling disempowered and we're feeling hopeless. We stop doing things that are good for us because we don't feel like doing them anymore. We don't feel like exercising. We don't feel like cooking good food. We don't feel like hanging out with our friends. We just feel like sitting on the sofa, watching stupid sitcoms and eating chips and chocolates. Or maybe we just feel like lying on the floor crying. Because that is what our brain makes us feel like doing. Because our brain makes us feel too sad or too tired to do those things that might be good for us, and the brain makes us think that doing these things are completely meaningless anyway, so we just don't feel like doing them. And what is important to remember then is that we don't have to do the things that we feel like doing. And in fact, when your brain is your worst enemy, it might actually be a good idea to do the opposite to what you feel like doing. It might be a better idea to do the things that you don't feel like doing. Because if you want to stop being depressed, you might need to stop doing the things that you do when you feel depressed, when you are being depressed, because of this connection between what we do and how we feel. So when you're feeling depressed, when you're being depressed, instead of doing what you feel like doing, it might be a good idea to look at what people that are happy and healthy do, and do what they're doing. And this is really, really difficult. This is something that takes a lot of practice. but it is another way of putting your worst enemy in place, so to speak. But this won't make you happy overnight, doing things you don't want to do only because they're good for you. But it will, if you manage to do it, it will create new behavioral patterns, and that in turn will bring with it new thoughts and new feelings that are making you feel better, and they will sort of push those thoughts and feelings that are making you feel bad to the side. So doing things that are good for you will make you feel better in turn. And this is, like, in my experience, where professionals that treat people with depression sort of go wrong a bit. Now, the mental health care system is different in different places, so this is my experience, and in my experience here, the treatments that you're offered if you're suffering depression is cognitive behavioral therapy that I mentioned before, and medication. And they work for a lot of people. They didn't work very well for me, and in my experience, the reason is that when these professionals offer cognitive behavioral therapy, they tell you what I just told you. It's good to you, it's good for you to do these certain things even if you don't feel like them. But when you're depressed, just having someone say, do this because it'll make you feel good, is just not going to be enough. That is not going to... Oh, I'm sorry, I think I have hair in my eye. That is not enough to give you the motivation to do these things. Because it's just not... It's not specific enough. It's rather abstract. It's not very sort of empowering. It's just someone preaching to you, and usually they're preaching something to you that you've already heard a lot of times before, because it's not exactly rocket science. And you need more when you're depressed to be able to get that motivation and sustain that motivation to do these things, like being physically active or eating healthy or do something, find a hobby or whatever, these things that are supposed to keep you active, these behaviors that are supposed to make you feel better in turn. And that's why I say that you need to do what the person you would like to be would have done, because that gives you the power, that gives you goals that come from yourself. Because when you're depressed, you'll constantly be dealing with the lure of the instant gratification of eating junk food and just staying in bed all day, because that is going to make you feel good for the moment. And doing these things that they tell you to do, being active, just seems so much more daunting than just, staying in the cozy bed and eating something nice. It's going to feel good in the moment, even though it's not good for you in the long term. But when you think about who you want to be, what kind of person you want to be, then you will be focusing on the things that are important for you. You will have goals that are coming from you, instead of someone else preaching some abstract principle of being active. And then that would be much more motivating. And it's because you can be much more specific with your goals and what it is you actually want to do. And then it's much more easier to see the connection between what you're doing in the here and now and the positive consequences, the goals, the rewards. And then it's much easier to sustain the motivation. You don't do yoga because someone told you that you should do something to get out of bed. You're doing yoga because you have decided that doing yoga is in line with who you want to be. So you get up in the morning and do the yoga because that's who you want to be. You want to be the kind of person who does yoga. You go out with your friends, not because someone told you that it's good for you to see some other people sometimes. You're going out with your friends because you're the kind of person, or you want to be the kind of person who has meaningful relationships. You clean your house because you want to be the kind of person who has a nice house. Or you don't, because you don't care about a nice house. I mean, it's different. People are different. We want to be different people, and so we want to do different things. And when you think about it like that, not only will you be able to reduce the symptoms of depression, you'll be able to recover from depression, you will also become more like the person you want to be. You have a bigger vision to sort of work towards. And when you do this, the first step isn't to just be active. The first step is actually to think about who you want to be and be very detailed about that. What time does the person you want to be get up in the morning? What does the person you want to be want to have for breakfast? How does the person you want to be behave at work, with the colleagues, with clients? How do they approach the task? How do they behave at home with the family? What do they do in the weekends? What do they do in the evenings after work? Details. So you can have very specific goals. And then when you think about it in that sense, you will probably discover, not necessarily, but probably, that you would also want to be a person that eats fairly healthy most of the time at least, and that does some kind of physical activity, because most of us want to be persons that feel as good as we can in our bodies, and that is what we can do to feel better in our bodies. And then you can be more specific about that too. If you decide you want to be the kind of person who does some kind of physical activity, what kind of physical activity will that be? Are you the kind of person who goes to the gym? Or goes for long walks in nature? Or that's dancing? You know, do what you think. And don't be afraid to try different things. If you're not sure, there's no harm in trying. Do you want to be the kind of person who paints? You can try. See. And if you're having trouble figuring out what kind of person you want to be and what that person does and how that person lives their lives, I mean, you can always look for role models. I'm not telling you to like mimic someone in every aspect of their life, but look, like, if you have a role model, look at which habits they have, if there's something there you can adopt. Look at which values they seem to be having, and if that's something that could that you could get some inspiration from. Um, but also remember that there can be things sometimes that you want to do because it's what the person that you would like to do would have done, but you just can't pull yourself together enough to do, or that you could also be sometimes that you simply forget what kind of person you want to be and what the person you would like to be would have done. And then it's good to make a plan in advance or make a schedule. You can decide that on this day I'm going to do this, and you can decide have a daily schedule if you want, like at this time I'm getting up, this time I'm having breakfast, this time I'm going for a walk, then I'm going to read for an hour, and then I'm having lunch, and I'm having this for lunch. And you can set an alarm so you stick to those times, or you can put reminders on the fridge or wherever so you remember. And you can simply decide that you also want to be the kind of person who sticks to the schedule and to the plans. But we're coming to point 3 now, because if you're struggling with depression, you will fail with point 1 and point 2. You will. Everyone that struggles with depression will fail on the first and the second points here that I've been talking about. But that's fine. It could also be that your depression was triggered because of some failure in your life, or you feel like a failure because you're suffering from a depression right now. And that's fine, because failure is an inevitable part of life. Everyone fails. Everyone fails a lot, almost all the time, and that's fine. There will be occasions when your negative thoughts are spiraling completely out of control, and you end up eating chips on the sofa or crying on the floor or whatever. That is going to happen if you're struggling with the depression. But that is not a reason to give up. Maybe you got up on the time that you had decided to do in the morning, and that is a success. Even if everything went pear-shaped after that, you had that success. And even though you fell off the wagon, you can always climb back up on that wagon anytime. Failing is not a big deal. The key to success is to realize that failure is something that happens. It's a natural part of being alive. But it is something that you put behind you and move on. Failure is not the end. You can always make another attempt, and you can try again and again and again. And failure isn't bad, it's actually something good, because when you fail, you can learn from that. You can learn what it was that tripped you up, and then you can plan accordingly to avoid that same thing again. Failing makes you more experienced. It makes you wiser. It makes you stronger. Each time you have a failure and you get back up, you get stronger. And each time you fail, you get closer to success, because you learn from your failures. So you have more knowledge now, which makes you better equipped for having the success you want. And the failures will come less and less often. They will be more and more rare. if you just keep at it, keep trying. So failing is not a reason to give up. Failing is not a bad thing, and failing is something that will happen. So those are the 3 points that you need to know in order to deal with depression, in my experience. You need to remember that your brain is your biggest enemy. You need to remember that you shouldn't do what you feel like doing. You should do what the person you would like to be would have done. And you need to remember that failing is inevitable, but failing is not a reason to give up. I think that was all I had to say. So I hope this was of some kind of help to you. If you like this video, please subscribe. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Thanks for watching.